Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's program, Alaska's Infrastructure Report Card and a Look Forward. Our intention to host this program was formed months ago. At that time, the national debate on an infrastructure bill was just beginning to take shape. We thought the debate in the House would be over and that Congress would be conferencing on the details of the final version of the bill as we convene today. However, a very promising infrastructure bill has passed the Senate, but the debate wages on in the House. To complicate matters, federal budget and debt limit have engaged as threshold issues that could pose serious delays, if not make collateral damage out of the progress on this most promising legislation. While the machinations of Washington, D.C. grind on, we remain hopeful and want to turn our attention to the future and realizing what an enrolled infrastructure bill will mean for our state. Infrastructure not only moves us forward in a literal sense, increasing our capacity to move goods and move people, but also by creating opportunities in our economy, in our communities, and in our daily lives. Infrastructure provides forward momentum and uplift that will shift us out of these past 2 years and into the future. We've invited our guests today to help us understand where we are starting from with a report card on our infrastructure as it stands today, and a look forward to planned and hoped for improvements. Before I introduce our guests, I want to take a moment to thank Alaska Communications, ConocoPhillips Alaska, Northern Bank, and the UAA Institute of Social and Economic Research for their support and underwriting of Commonwealth North's programs and operations. We appreciate your support, which has been so vital to the continuance of our programs this year. Now let me introduce today's speakers. First, Tor Anderzen, professional engineer. Tor is a senior aviation engineer at HDL Engineering Consultants, LLC in Palmer. He has 15 years of airport planning, design, and construction experience and is a licensed professional civil engineer in Alaska and Montana. He serves as the Region 8 Governor for the American Society of Civil Engineers. David Gamez is a professional engineer as well. David is a civil engineer and program manager with Lounsbury and Associates here in Anchorage. Dave specializes in geometric design and signalization on highway projects. His experience in aspects of roadway and site design for public agencies across Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. In addition to leadership roles with the Alaska section of the American Society of Civil Engineers, he has chaired the Committee on Autonomous Vehicles for the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Alaska section. Lastly is Ryan Anderzen. Earlier this month, Governor Dunleavy named Ryan Anderzen to serve as Commissioner of the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. Congratulations, Ryan. Commissioner Anderzen is a 20-year employee of the department. He most recently served as its Northern Region Director, overseeing design, construction, maintenance, and operations of a transportation system that serves communities in a geographically and culturally diverse region that extends from the Gulf of Alaska to the Arctic Ocean and from the Bering Sea to the Canadian border. Before our panelists begin, I want to extend my thanks to the Commonwealth North members who are online with us today. We're grateful for your participation in programs and study groups, as well as your commitment to engage in public policy. For those of you who are not members, we always want to take a moment to thank you and invite you to also join Commonwealth North. We'll provide a link for you in the chat window to learn more about membership options. Now let's hear from our guests. Dave and Tor will co-present the first part of our program. Dave, please unmute. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott. Let me know if you're able to see my screen. Hit the share button here.
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Let's see. Am I sharing the correct screen though? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. First and foremost, I want to thank Scott and Juanita for having us here today. Appreciate Commonwealth North including us on the program today. Before I get started on the infrastructure report card, which we're going to highlight here, I want to talk a little bit about ASCE. ASCE is the American Society of Civil Engineers, and it represents more than 150,000 members from the civil engineering profession in 177 countries. It's the oldest engineering society in the United States and was founded in 1852 and is headquartered in Reston, Virginia. In Alaska, we have over 800 members in both the public and private sectors, and we also operate 2 student chapters at UAA and UAF. Our branches are across the state. We have branches in Anchorage, Fairbanks, Juneau, Ketchikan, and Matsu. So the infrastructure report card is actually, Alaska released our first report card in 2017, but this is actually a national effort that has been going on since 1998. It's been going on every 4 years. ASE has a release, and typically it gets some attention in the national headlines and national news. The latest release of the infrastructure report card was in March 2021. And the GPA from the latest report card on the national level was a C-, which is slightly better than the previous 2017 report card, which was a D+. There were 18 different categories covered in the report card this previous release, and the next release of the report card is expected to be in 2025. And as we all know, and we've been hearing in the news lately, there's a large infrastructure package that's being discussed at the federal level, which could have a major impact on these grades that are on the screen right now. In Alaska, like I said, we released our first infrastructure report card in 2017, and this is a state-specific report card. We had over 40 volunteers pour over thousands of pages of publicly available data in order to synthesize that information and put it into a concise report to evaluate our infrastructure in the state. So the reason we decided to put together a report card for the state was to focus awareness on the conditions of Alaska's infrastructure. And we also, one of our main key goals was to inform our decision makers as to those conditions so that they can make informed decisions and prioritize infrastructure in our state. We also wanted to advocate for sustainable operation and maintenance to extend the service life of our existing facilities. And we noted in our report that new capital projects, as opposed to, a reconstruction or resurfacing projects or things that reconstruct our existing infrastructure, new capital projects weren't necessarily the best solutions to raising our grades. So what did we look at in our report card? So we looked at 8 key criteria for each one of the infrastructure modes that we graded, and those are shown on the screen here. Each one of these, like I said, we poured over publicly available information to come up with grades individually for each of these criteria, and then came up with comprehensive grades for each mode of infrastructure. So the grades were A through F. So like on a report card that you would get from your kid's school, A being the best, exceptional, fit for the future, down to F, failing, and unfit for use. Alaska's cumulative grade came in at a C- for our 2017 report card. So the infrastructure categories that we graded, you can see on our screen, we've got 9 different, and you might be wondering, well, why only 9 when the national report card has 18? Well, that's a function of the availability of volunteers, unpaid volunteers, to go through this information and put together these reports. So we were fortunate enough to have about 40 volunteers to put together the reports for these 9 different categories. And so today, Tor and I will cover a few of these categories here and just give a general overview of our findings from the reports. First, we'll cover roads and highways, which received a grade of a C-, and just kind of a general overview, some information and data that a lot of us may know. Alaska, is the largest state in the union. It's about 2.5 times the size of Texas. So Alaska has about 15,700 lane miles of road, and about which 3,700 are paved. In comparison to Texas, which has a much more dense network of roads has 675,000 lane miles of roads. Alaska, as we all know, is the least densely populated state in the country, and is one of the youngest, the 49th state, admitted to the Union in 1959. So we have not a large network of roads to operate and maintain, but they're spread out through vast distances, which is a big challenge. A few more key data points to note here is that about 72% of the population resides in 3 metro areas, which are Anchorage and the Mat-Su, Fairbanks North Star, and the Juneau-Douglas area. 23% of the state is spread out through 21 towns with a population of 1,000 or more, and about 5% of the state resides in about 122 villages of population less than 1,000. As far as reporting for the infrastructure report card, and this is similar through each one of the infrastructure categories, there is robust data and information for the 72% population area that's available was available for us to use in these reports. And as the population decreased, or the areas with less population, there was less information available. So that was kind of a challenge going into putting the report together for Alaska. As far as conditions are concerned, our findings for conditions for roads and highways, the report that we were working off of graded Alaska's roads as fair, a pavement serviceability rating of 3.1, which is just above marginal. So there are several key challenges with that. You know, we have seasonal frost heave that our roads have to deal with, and impacts from studded tires and rutting in the roads. And these are, you know, things that pop up more regularly than they might in other states. Operations and maintenance, I would say, is probably one of the biggest challenges in Alaska, not only because the state is so large, but the climate varies throughout the state. Ketchikan averages about 140 inches of rain per year. Valdez averages about 330 inches of snow per year. And in Fairbanks, you can have fluctuations in temperature from -50 to almost 100 degrees or more throughout the year. All of these impacts, all of these have cumulative impacts on the roads. So it's quite a bit to maintain. And as you can see, Alaska has natural disasters that we deal with almost on an annual basis. I've got a few pictures on this slide of the Richardson Highway avalanche that you might remember, the Dalton Highway flooding, and I should have added a picture from the 2018 earthquake on here as well. But our operations and maintenance crews have to deal with these situations along with the varying climates across the state. So needless to say, it's a major challenge. And one of the more challenging things for the operations and maintenance crews for the state and local governments is that the funding has been cut, particularly for state maintenance crews over the last several years. So, you know, budgets previously discussed talk about you know, less maintenance and operations on roads that may not be so critical. So with that, I'll transition to the next slide, which talks about funding. So funding is also a major challenge, and it kind of ties into directly to the operations and maintenance slide. So this image in the middle of this slide here is from the Alaska DOT Long Range Transportation Plan. The DOT doesn't currently have sufficient funding to exercise its full responsibility for preserving the transportation system while also developing the system. Without additional revenue, the funding shortfall will become larger. This statement was from the long-range transportation plan put together in 2018. And if you think back to 2018, the price of a barrel of oil was average about $100. The state had better funding at the time. Since then, this statement has become more true and funding has been cut. One particular thing that I'd like to note is that the federal FAST Act, or the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, which was passed in 2015, authorized about $305 billion, of which about $520 million annually was for Alaska over fiscal years 2016 through 2020. So that money was received, and the state was able to use that towards capital improvements. And I'd like to just make note that capital improvements are separate from operations and maintenance. Operations and maintenance come from the state's coffers, not federal government. So though that the FAST Act funds did come in to help with capital projects, the operations and maintenance still receive budget cuts. So recommendations for roads. Our recommendations from our reporting were continued funding for transportation maintenance and rehabilitation and upgrades of our existing systems, and development and adoption of improved standards to increase the service life of our roadways, and continued funding for implementation of innovative intelligent transportation system technologies to improve our efficiency and safety. A few updates that I would like to note from the 2017 report, and which we may see in our next infrastructure report card for Alaska, is that the FAST Act was reauthorized through 2021. However, it does expire tomorrow. So those are about $540 million that will no longer be received if it's not reauthorized for another year, or if an additional or a new infrastructure bill is not passed. I'd like to also note that the percentage of non-interstate national highway system roads with poor pavement decreased from 15.6 to 8.1% between 2015 and 2018. So that's a major improvement on the roads that are considered in poor condition. And this could be tied directly to those FAST Act funds that were used efficiently to increase the condition of our roads. And then I'd also like to note that the Department of Transportation is operating on about $22 million less than they were six years ago to maintain the same roads that they had. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Tor Anderzen.
Thank you, David. And so I'm first going to talk a little bit about our airport system in the state of Alaska. And airports in our state, as you can see in the pictures here, represent a wide range in need and purpose. I know that since this picture was taken, the passenger shelter in Nanwalek has been repainted, and it does look a lot nicer today. But if we compare that to the aviation needs and activities that take place at Ted Stevens International, that kind of sets the range of our passenger service airports, or airports where we receive passenger service. DOT's aviation, or Alaska Aviation System Plan, has identified aviation as Alaska's, or rural Alaska's, lifeline. A large part of our state is only accessible by air during long periods of time or long parts of the year. And that means that Alaskans are about 8 times more likely to travel by air. We have about 6 times as many pilots as the national average, and about 6 times as many aircraft as the national average. 61 airports in the state are serviced with essential air service grants, which is a funding mechanism that FAA has and has used since deregulation to enable small airports to provide passenger service. So basically, different air carriers bid on the least amount of money they need from informal grants to maintain passenger service. Another mechanism that we have in our state to allow for passenger service in many of our rural airports is the bypass mail system, which allows mail carriers to split the cost for a flight between income carried or covered by the mail or incomes from the bypass mail system. And that makes it possible for many of our smaller communities to have passenger service to their communities. Next slide. So aviation is a huge economic driver in our state, contributes about $3.5 billion annually to our economy. It's it's an economic engine that kind of has a symbiotic relationship with our economy, because it both drives our economy, but it also relies on our economy to function. So there is a kind of a win-win scenario when we can have aviation services to our rural community. And if you look at particular at the Anchorage International Airport, so in the report card in 17, we identified it as the second largest cargo airport in the US. And at the time, it grew with a rate of about 6.7% annually. It's still the second largest in the US. For a period during the pandemic, we were the largest globally, but things are a little bit more back to normal. But we still have seen, even though COVID drove up our cargo volumes even early during the pandemic, we have seen for the first half of 2021, a 23.45% growth over the first half of 2020. So Anchorage is very solidly placed as a large cargo hub globally. And I think for a while we were the fourth largest. I think looking at the latest press release, looks like we're back down as number 5. We also pre-COVID serviced over 5 million passengers annually. And we are now, based on the latest press release I saw, for the first 6 months of the year, we have recovered about 83% of the 2019 passenger levels. So aviation is coming back, even with more restrictive passenger travel, with mask mandates and such. We are coming back, which is good for our Alaska economy. Ted Stevens' website says that the airport, Ted Stevens Airport, provides almost 15,600 airport and community jobs combined for the Anchorage MOA. And depending on how you view it, that number could be as large as 20,000 depending on how you draw the definition. Is this job created because the airport is here or not? We go to the next slide, David. So some of our recommendations, and particularly in the 2017 report card, was that we needed to better prioritize deferred maintenance. Many of our airports had identified maintenance needs, whether it's replacing burnt out lights or damaged lights on the runway edge lights, or resurfacing or regrading of gravel runways. This particular airport we're looking at is Akasuk, which was constructed back in the 80s with hydraulically placed fill. So it has a gravel perimeter and a silt core that's overlaid with a gravel cap. Permafrost melting, longer and warmer summers have led to the runway body starting to settle, and a new project is underway to reconstruct and to raise the grade of the runway to ensure that we maintain the ground underneath frozen. But rural construction costs enormous amounts of money in Alaska compared to many of the other states. Bringing in competent material or gravel that works, that's hard enough and resilient enough to function as a runway surface, can cost as much as $400 to $600 per yard for these projects. And so one of the recommendations we offered in our report card was that we need to continue research and develop cost-effective construction methods, whether it would be manufactured materials on site or reuse of some material and only bringing in a portion of the material that's necessary for new construction or reconstruction. One of the benefits that we've seen with the CARES Act is the CARES Act funds have been allowed in part to be used for maintenance and operation at airports, which has allowed DOT to apply for funds to address deferred maintenance. It has allowed several of the community-owned airports such as Merrill Field, Kenai, Palmer, Wasilla, and others to also put some CARES Act funds into, in some cases, just replacing the income lost due to COVID, but in other cases, put some money into deferred maintenance. Next slide. So another aspect of Alaska's aviation that makes us stand out from the rest of the nation is that since we often don't have a choice whether to fly or not, because it's the only way of travel, we have higher fatality and injury rates compared to the rest of the nation. We don't have the luxury to just fly another day and take the car instead. And so whereas for the US, the fatality and injury levels are about 1 for every 100,000 flight hours, the numbers in the 2017 report card were at about 1.69. We have over the last 10 years seen a reduction in the fatality and severe injury crashes by about 2.6%. And so we can see that it's going in the right direction, and it will, in our next report card release, will look a little bit better. Another of our recommendations was for safe flight planning, you need to have access to weather. And we recommended that more en route certified weather stations be constructed. Acting FAA Director Christy Warden announced in the October 2020 Safety Summit that they have procured an additional 35 weather stations that will be installed over the next couple of years, and added that they're hoping to use some of the CARES Act money that was still at that point not solidified in how it could be used. but they were hoping to utilize some of that funding for 25 more weather stations. As you can see here, 60 more weather stations would not bring us to the point where we reach this density of weather reporting that you see outside, but it was still almost double the amount of weather reporting stations that we have in the state. And so some of the updates, you see that essential air service, we actually corrected the previous slide, but the number of airports or communities that are served is 61. The FAA Airport Improvement Program was reauthorized through the fiscal year 2023. So unlike the surface transportation, our funding program does not expire tomorrow. Also in that reauthorization, there was supplemental funding of $1 billion that was a one-time additional bump in the AIP program that provided a lot of extra funding during the 2018 to 2020 time period. And for that funding, FAA provided 100% coverage, so you did not need to come up with matching funds. In April of last year, the CARES Act released another $124.7 million to be spent in the state of Alaska. And if we look at our 2021 total grants written by FAA, totaled about 337 million, which is significantly more than a regular year. Again, even though this supplemental funding and CARES Act funding, they're great infusions, they're also one-time infusions. So they will help us improve our infrastructure short-term, but our long-term needs are not going to be addressed, since basically the reauthorization of the AIP maintained the earlier levels of funding. So next slide.
Tor, just want to say we're short on time, so I think we'll need to.
I'll speed up
the next slides quickly.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know why it always happens. Our marine highway system is about 3,500 miles, stretches from Bellingham to Dutch Harbor, and it serves 31 coastal communities. There has been a lot of changes in the marine highway system from our 2017 report. And so some of these numbers are outdated, but we can see that we still have 4 of our now 9 ferries are over 40 years old, but that the 9 ferries that we have also include the Selena and Hubbard that have been put into service over the last couple of years. For the marine highway system, we made a few recommendations, some of which were implemented almost before we even released our 2017 report. But they were to kind of better plan and budget for maintenance to minimize downtime, and to seek additional operational efficiencies for both vessels and shoreside operations. And next was to develop a long-range strategic plan for operations. And I believe that study is completed with the study on how to reshape the Alaska Marine Highway system. I have not yet seen our updated report, but I'm very curious to see just how much the changes were. Quickly on the other infrastructure modes that were covered in our 17 report card. We gave a C to solid waste based primarily on the condition of our class 1 or large landfills. And obviously we see a wide range in the energy systems available to different communities in our state, with microgrids that are, or ranging from microgrids that are running part-time during the day to large systems such as we have in the rail belt. when it comes to dams, our dam safety program has actually been a little bit of a shining star for many other states and something to emulate and to aspire to accomplish. Our dams are in pretty good condition. We were even considering a slightly higher grade than a C+. And then for water and wastewater, the range is so enormous. The majority of our population have access to running water. And as David mentioned earlier, over 70% live in the free metropolitan areas. But even inside those metropolitan areas, a lot of the water and wastewater is private systems. And so we have as many as 30 communities that don't have running water at all. And so now I'd like to spend just a little bit of time to talk about what the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is and what the impacts would be for Alaska. So like was mentioned earlier, the development of this IIJA Act started back in early May, and where the bipartisan group was formed in the Senate to work on a plan for a bipartisan infrastructure package. And it was passed in the Senate August 10th and moved over to the House. And it's scheduled to be voted on tomorrow. Our Congressman Young gave a very passionate and strong speech on the House floor yesterday, urging fellow members to support the IIJA, not because it is the plan he would have written or act he would have written, or the act many would have written, but because it is the act we have. And if they don't act, we have funding programs that expire. And we'll have to wait and see what happens in the House. And so some of these numbers are going to be subject to what comes out in conference committee between the House and the Senate. But what the bill contains today is about $3.5 billion in highway funding for Alaska. That's about a 34% increase over the funding levels in the FAST Act. 225 million of that is dedicated towards our bridges to be spent over the next 5 years. In addition to that, there is also 12.5 billion in competitive grants through a new bridge investment program over the next 5 years. Challenge for many of our rural community or smaller communities would be to compete for these funds and to make a bridge in Coal Bay seem as important as a bridge in Detroit could be hard. But in theory, the money is available. There is also 27.5 billion set aside for a new bridge program formula to repair bridges in poor conditions. 15% of that is set aside for off-system bridges for local and tribal governments. The bill also contains 370 million for public transit over the next 5 years for system improvements. It contains 392 million for airports to improve, and these are mostly capacity improvements, terminal improvements, and similar to be used over the next 5 years. It contains $368 million of drinking water funding to be entered into the state revolving fund formula. It also has 2.3 billion for additional dam safety programs, which includes 585 million for high hazard dam rehabilitation. The Lowell Creek Diversion Dam or Diversion Tunnel might be a perfect example or perfect candidate for that high hazard dam rehab. The Corps of Engineers have been working on that for a while. So here is a press release from Senator Murkowski's office. That's a couple days old. And as you can see in her press release, she references our state report card and the grade that the state report card gave to our overall infrastructure. It's a sign that, or kind of a result of ASCE using our report card over the last 4 years in advocacy work, both locally, in our local communities, in our state, and on the national level. Our senators and congressmen are very familiar with our report card. And as you can see, it's also our state legislature, which referenced our report card in the joint resolution this spring. David has done a tremendous job of reaching out and utilizing the report card in the last couple of years. And then moving on, so what can we do to raise the grade? And we need to make state and federal funding for improvements a priority. We can see by the efforts in Congress right now with the $1.3 trillion IIJA plan that they are putting priority on our infrastructure. We can also see by the joint resolution from the state that they are recognizing the need to prioritize our infrastructure. And especially when it comes to water and wastewater programs, to better coordinate among state, federal, and Alaska Native programs so that we can stretch the dollar further and prioritize the systems that we work on. We recommend that we perform system evaluations of our infrastructure to identify and assess risk and to incorporate that into planning efforts and to develop and implement innovative technology and operations, to focus on durable and sustainable system design that reduces life cycle and operation and maintenance cost. And we need to work hard on bridging the gap in operation and maintenance to allow our communities to maintain existing infrastructure. And for more information, you can visit these websites. And we've been running long. I apologize to Ryan and to the group if we're taking up too much of your time, but I'll pass it back to Scott or to Ryan.
Just Scott.
Well, thanks, Tor. Thanks for your presentation, both you and Dave. You did a good job of framing our infrastructure status today and some of the opportunities we have for improvement. I think you've also really hit upon a key point, and that is our extreme reliance on federal funding to improve our infrastructure system. So now let's hear from Commissioner Anderzen. Commissioner, I know you've just taken the reins of a massive portfolio of assets, projects, personnel, and no doubt challenges. We look forward to your remarks. Please unmute. The floor is now yours.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity today, and really appreciate the presentation that we all just were able to view. Yeah, I think that ASCE report card, it's a valuable thing, having a third-party review of our infrastructure throughout the state. That's something I support. I think it's, having different people with different perspectives, especially in a state like Alaska, where we have so many challenges all around. It's really helpful for us as a department. I do have a presentation I can run through, and it's I'll go through it pretty quick because I think many of these things have already been talked about today, but I do want to give people a good overview of DOT and kind of where we're headed. Granted, yeah, I'm just over 3 weeks into the commissioner position, and so I'm learning as I go. But with my experience, I have been with DOT for 20 years. I've worked in design, construction, planning, all of those venues, and maintenance operations as a regional director for 5 years for all of Northern region. So I'm pretty excited to take the experiences I've had and apply them across the state. So we go to the next slide. DOT itself is made up of many divisions. And you can keep going with the animations there. We have 3 big geographic districts, northern, central, and south coast. You know, any one of those districts is pretty big, both geography and, you know, culturally diverse. We also, besides the regions, you know, we have a statewide aviation group that oversees aviation throughout the state. We have our international airport system. We have Alaska Marine Highways, as you saw on some previous slides. Design and engineer services, facility services. You know, DOT manages a huge amount of buildings throughout the state. Measurement standards and commercial vehicle compliance. Those are the weigh stations along the highways that make sure the trucks are legal as they're driving down the roads for safety, and as well as to make sure our roads stay in good shape, that we don't have overloaded vehicles. And they even do things where when you're in the grocery store and you're weighing out your food, they're certifying those scales. So a lot of work that goes on there for DOT. Program development is the funding management for all these federal funds that come in. And then the statewide equipment fleet, that's how we manage the equipment for all of the state of Alaska. So you'll see DOT, we're you know, 3,300 employees, and we're out there every day. We like to say that, you know, we serve Alaskans every day. Alaskans interact with infrastructure every day. So we take that serious. Go to the next slide. You know, geography, culture, diversity, you know, when you look at Alaska's cultures, we're talking, you know, 231 tribes, 12 Alaska Native regional corporations, 5 major Alaska Native cultural groups. And when we're working in transportation, those folks, you know, we work to consult with them to make sure that we're making good decisions with communities and not, you know, decisions that don't make sense. So that's something we really push on. With the geography, of course, you know, you can go all the way up to the North Slope and the coastal plains up there in the Arctic, all the way down to, you know, the Southeast Alaska with that coastal climate. High seismic activity, you know, when we're designing roads and bridges, we have to factor those things in. And I think we do a pretty good job. And then when we do have those earthquakes and whatnot, you know, our crews, along with, you know, the contractors throughout the state, we team up and we get these things fixed. So a lot going on there. And then, you know, this widespread and varied population areas, that's a real challenge for us. We go from urban environments, you know, when you're in Anchorage, or let's say, you know, Fairbanks and the Mat-Su, Juneau, but then you go out beyond that and we get into the highway system communities, which kind of are different. You know, they have access to the resources, but, you know, they're farther to travel to. And then we have our rural Alaska with no roads, and the access is pretty limited, and it's different. So really some good challenges there that you know, we tackle in a lot of different ways. The next slide. And then this is just your map of Alaska with all of the blue dots are all of the airports. The red dots are maintenance camps. You can't quite see on the airports. We have maintenance, you know, facilities at each one of those airports as well. They can vary from a small, you know, just an equipment storage building to a airport rescue firefighting building where, you know, we have those types of operations coming in. And so these are critical for maintaining our infrastructure, making sure that we're, you know, doing a good job there. So that's important. And then of course you can see the Marine Highway system on there as well. Next slide. And here's just a quick summary. If you're interested in, you know, DOT's infrastructure and what's out there, I think the ASCP report card does a nice job of putting these, kind of laying out just what it looks like for Alaska. And just some of the things I will highlight is, you know, when you look at the number of bridges we have, the number of public facilities, you know, the weigh stations, you know, harbors, ferries, it's just a real diverse, you know, it's not just roads and highways, it's all over the place. It's like, yeah, this one talks a little bit about our challenges with budget, which has been discussed already. You know, since 2015, 2016, we've seen some pretty fair reductions in our operating budgets. And these are the budgets where, you know, we're plowing snow, we're cutting brush, those kind of things. And so I would say, you know, typically we've seen about a 30% reduction. I think in Marine Highways, they kind of had a pretty hefty reduction there a couple of years ago. But how have we dealt with this? I mean, that's actually a pretty good story. There's, our folks on the M&O side, they don't just roll over and, oh, geez, woe is us. No, we look for efficiencies. We look for better ways to do things. I think some of the things you'll see out there now is we have priority systems on our highways. So, we're communicating to the public when a road is going to be plowed after a storm event, within how many hours. And we have a priority system. So the lower volume roads take a little longer, but the service is still there. We're not plowing roads. We're also getting bigger equipment. So, one operator can plow 2 lanes of roads with some of these new tow plows and some of these bigger pieces of equipment that we're using. So, in some respects, we're finding new ways, innovations to deal with these challenges. But we still got a lot of challenges out there. There's no doubt. And we've got a lot of things that we still need to work on when it comes to, operating our system. And then, of course, other challenges we have that are kind of outside of our control, changing weather patterns. We get into more and more flood situations, just things that happen. We've had a lot of snow, some pretty high snow years the past few years too. Increase in commodity costs, and that's something we're really watching, especially with this infrastructure bill. Inflation, how is that going to affect us? We have limited personnel right now. With the pandemic and this kind of subsequent fallout with the workforce, it is getting tougher in certain locations to find equipment operators and those types of folks to get the job done. So that's something that we're watching close. And again, with turnover and recruitment, the same thing, finding the people to do these things. We see that it's going to be a bigger challenge for us. And then things like motor fuel tax receipts. When we're for our maintenance forces and operations, we rely on motor fuel tax for a portion of those funds. And the past year with the pandemic, people weren't driving as much, and so those go down. Now that does look like it's recovering, and so that hopefully that's just a temporary. Next slide. And then we have some of the kind of big projects that we're working on right now in Alaska. One of our biggest projects at DOT is the Sterling Highway 45 to 60 mile, also known as the Cooper Landing Bypass Project. This is a project that's been around for a long time. It's much needed for both safety and mobility. The way we pushed this thing forward was through an innovative procurement process called CMGC, Contract Manager, General Contractor, where we can basically bring a contractor on during design, and they help us get through the design, telling us the best way, or helping us understand the best way to design a project from their perspective. And we push a project along that way. And we've had a lot of success with those kind of ideas. Just last year, we did pass a bill in the legislature that's now law for the CMGC process. And so we plan on using that as a way to, push on projects and keep them moving in the future. So this project is, right now it's estimated at $485 million. We are always looking to bring those costs down, but this will provide a nice bypass road. I believe it's about 17 miles of new road to bypass that Cooper Landing community. Next slide, please. So yeah, so right now, especially this week, all the talk is about the infrastructure bill. Again, a $1 trillion federal infrastructure bill package. Boy, yeah, we're excited about this. We think there's just so much opportunity, but there's some challenges. When you start talking about labor shortages, materials, and supply chains. I mean, we've had some shortages over the past year with just some things from, I think it was still dating back to when the refineries down in Texas had the cold snap down there, and things like paint, road paint, has been tough for us but we figure it out, but there's a lot of indicators out there that these supply chains are fairly stressed right now. And then, we're getting ready for this onslaught of funds and to deliver projects that are needed, because there's a lot of needs out there. Next slide. So again, I think this has kind of been gone over again, but it'll be a 5-year, the IIJA, they're calling it, a 5-year reauthorization. 550 billion above normal funding levels. So it's over a 50% increase to USDOT. 3.8 billion is Alaska's share over 5 years. So that's a good amount of funding there. And the focus, for some of these formula programs that you would see is bridges, electrical vehicle charging is a big focus, and then ferry boats has a big focus, and there's a lot of potential there to help with the Alaska Marine Highway System. Thank you. And so with the federal infrastructure funds, there's a big portion of this that's called discretionary grants, which means we have to be competitive with the rest of the country. And so we're strategizing. We're going to be looking for a lot of partnerships on that. We love to partner with local communities to see how we can work together to go after these funds and be the most competitive. But we're going to be working hard to see how we can resource this as a DOT to make that best fit, on how can we all do this so that DOT can be an advocate, to really compete for these discretionary costs. And this kind of goes into the partnerships. It really, when what we've learned, especially, as I've been working up north, when we can find projects that communities support and they partner with us on them, a lot of times, they'll do things like provide the match for the project, or they may have gravel, those types of things that we can work together to support each other on. Those projects are just awesome. Federal and state agency partners, the environmental agencies, our federal funding partners, all those folks, super important to work close with them. Private sector, we're going to need all the help we can get for this infrastructure bill. It's going to be all hands on deck. And so we're going to be looking to the private sector for as much help as we can get. Community organizations out there, and then our contractors, the construction contractors, they're going to have a lot of the same challenges as all of us probably with workforce and everything else. Next slide, please. And so some of the things we're also trying to do, because as this infrastructure bill comes to the front, we want to make the right funding investment decisions, and we want to be transparent so people can see, where these funds are being spent. So we're looking at technology solutions. The STIP, which is our statewide transportation improvement program, lays out all the highways funding program for everyone, and we're trying to make that electronic, so you can look at it. It doesn't pull up a bunch of spreadsheets. It can be math-based, so you have quicker access to. For me, I'm a visual person. I can get somewhere faster if I see it on a map and I can click. And so we're going to look at those kind of things and really try to help people, have quicker access to information to see what's going on, and to have input on that as well. Next slide. And so, as we go forward, one of the things I'm thinking about as a commissioner, public and community engagement on this infrastructure bill is going to be critical. People have that opportunity. We know this is a lot of funding, and our staff levels, we don't intend to add, a lot of people. We want to try to do this with what we have, and streamlining policies can help us with that. And then preparing for increased resource needs. That's how do we do this, and that's going to come at us here pretty quick. And then working with our federal partners. So yeah, we want to think big. We want to think smart. And be ready for this. And that's my presentation. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Commissioner. That was a great presentation on what Alaska is doing to try to meet the challenges ahead. A couple of things I took away from that. One is the efficiencies and innovation the department is pursuing in light of budget pressures on O&M, as well as trying to become more cost effective in the capital program. So that's very good news, because as we all know, the state UGF is unlikely to go back to levels we saw years ago. The other thing that struck me was that I went back and did kind of a back of the envelope calculation of how much money is going to come to Alaska on top of the money coming for highways and road systems. And through carve outs and formulas, it looks like it's something in the range of $5 billion. But But there's also the competitive stuff that you mentioned. And also one of the big components of the competitive process is also going to be with our tribes. So clearly, as you outlined, it's going to be incumbent upon Alaska to marshal all of its forces to try to be very competitive on the funds that are out there outside of the carve-outs and formulas, and also to enlist our tribes. I think at the end of the day, if all of our communities that don't currently have running water and sewer infrastructure, if we could get that done, that would be a tremendous accomplishment as well. But again, that's something that's going to require a lot of focus from Alaskans and our tribes to make that happen. But again, thank you very much. I think there was a lot of good information there. And if this bill gets passed, I think it's kind of all hands on deck, as you outlined, to try to make sure that Alaska can get the things that it needs and that's going to be available under this bill. Juanetta, do we have any questions for our speakers?
Yes, thanks, Scott. We do have questions. Just as a reminder, you can use the question and answer window to ask questions for the panelists. We'll get those answers live. I'm not actually sure if everybody can see the answered questions, but there has been a couple of questions that were answered. But I guess we'll just go ahead and do it live just in case. Alex Hills asked a question regarding broadband, which was ranked nationally in the ASCE report card. And Tor, you answered that question about why was there nothing at all in the Alaska report card, and do you have plans to include it in the next Alaska report card?
Yeah, thank you, Juanetta, and thank you, Alex, for the question. Yes, so the national report card did not have an assigned grade for broadband. We worked really hard on the industry connections to try to get the information necessary for us to develop a grade. ASCE does not produce the information we use in the report cards. We rely on the infrastructure owners' reports themselves. And many broadband operators did not want to share their capacity and condition data, fearing that they would be releasing kind of industry secrets. And so what we had to do, or what we felt, was that broadband is so important that we still included kind of a partial section on it, highlighting what's important for broadband infrastructure. And the Alaska section is in a similar boat, and we don't have any better access to our broadband providers in state than we did nationally. So our plan is to do it similarly. We will have a brief discussion about broadband in our state in our energy section, but we are unfortunately not able to get the information necessary to do the whole report. We hope that changes, but that's why it wasn't included more.
Great. All right. Thanks, Tor. We also have a question. I think this is really kind of for you, Commissioner, from Kevin Mackey. He's asking, how does DOT use the ASCE report card? Obviously, some elected officials are referring to it. Does it inform what you're doing and how you're moving forward with some of the challenges within the department?
Yeah, no, for sure. Anytime we have a kind of that third-party review, that's something that we can use, internally to kind of assess how well we're making decisions as we go forward. But it also helps us on the bigger front, with operating budgets and legislators. It's sometimes, if we're aligned on what we're saying, considering, some of the challenges with the operating budget and whatnot, that adds strength to our arguments to have that ASCE report card out there as well. And obviously in this case, it also got the attention of some senators on the federal side. So I think that all is great. And I think honestly, we're in the middle of or just about on the edge of having an infrastructure bill. And I think having a report card like this just adds to that argument about why we need that. So no, super, yeah, we definitely are looking at these things and they're helping us make decisions.
Great. Dave Reese is online with us. Dave's a longtime advocate for workforce development, and he's noted that of course, everybody has mentioned the need for workforce. And so maybe, I guess, Commissioner, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Will there be collaboration with the Alaska Department of Labor on training programs and identifying in-demand occupations that additional training is needed for? And likewise, I guess, Dave and Tor, how might the private sector be engaged in workforce development?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's going to be one of the challenges, I think, over the next couple of years. We definitely work with the Department of Labor and trying to secure, the training and apprenticeships, those types of things that we can. What we're finding is, we try to put training out there ourselves. We had an example over this past summer where we started, we have an opportunity for some funding through a local transportation assistance program, federal funds, where we can hire greater trainings, and then we can bring people in from rural communities all over the place to get some training on those types of things. And that's pretty successful. A lot of facilitation, goes into that, but then, the benefit is we train people, but we also find people, that are interested in maybe interested in work. So we're really trying to kind of do that on the ground approach right now, just to keep our staffs, our agencies going.
Dave, Tor, any thoughts about workforce?
Sure. I'll kind of add to that, at least from the private consulting side. We rely heavily on Alaska grown engineers. So our greatest resource for engineers to be able to react to any additional projects that may come out of this infrastructure bill, our resource for those engineers are from UAA and UAF. So, having well-established and, top operating universities with engineering programs to mint Alaska grown engineers is essential, at least for private businesses.
And do you want to add anything to that, Tor?
The only thing I would add is it's something that we have long discussed with our state legislators in our advocacy efforts, is the long-term implications of having a good, solid engineering program in state, and the need to maintain funding for that and make sure that the program remains viable. But otherwise, very well covered.
All right, thanks. We have a question from Barbara Haney, who is online with us, and I think this is for the commissioner. And I'll pile on to her question a little bit. Commissioner, you mentioned the ESTIP program as an innovation and as a way for more citizen engagement and participation in the transportation planning process. And Barbara's really talking about one of the challenges that she's seen in the interior is that there are projects that advance that people, communities aren't that enthusiastic about or wouldn't prioritize as highly, and others that don't seem to move at all. And I can just add to some experience. Now, aviation a lot of times is more federally focused than it is state focused, but at least there is some partnership there. But I'm aware of communities where entirely new airports have been built, really against the will of the community. And those are for various reasons, but how can we improve the local engagement process and make sure that the most desired and beneficial projects are moving forward in a timely fashion? Commissioner?
That's a great question. Some of these things, with our reliance on federal funds, there's a lot of federal rules that drive the decisions we're making. And so I would say on some of these things, when you look at safety, mobility, those types of things, I'm very familiar with some projects in the interior where, we build some roundabouts and people don't want them. But there's a safety factor there that we get pushed pretty hard on with the federal funds that we have to make sure. And I know On the aviation side, that happens as well, where an airport is close to a community, and the community really likes that because you can get off the plane, you can walk to town. But with the federal funds, there's a lot of rules about how close an airport can be to certain types of facilities, and so then we end up moving them. So that weighs into some of it. I think on the planning side, it's always challenging for us. People aren't as excited when we get into planning as into construction. When the bulldozers show up, then that gets everybody's attention and everybody knows it's a project. And I think DOT can do a better job on the planning side, trying to reach out and make sure people know those early opportunities for input are where you'll have the most effect. I like the model we have in the interior. In Fairbanks, they have the Fairbanks Area Surface Transportation Planning Group, which is a group of all the local mayors and a certain group of designated other officials that get together once a month, and they have a transportation plan that together they make decisions for the community on where they're going to invest the funds. That's a good model that allows a lot of folks to have input on it. And so I know those are the types of things I think that have been successful. And so I guess that's where I go. But in the planning phases, to beef that up, that is where folks have the most opportunities for comment.
Okay, well, I'm going to call for some audibles here in just a second. We've got some board members online, and if they have any questions, if they want to pipe in, I'll look for raised hands. But I'll add one question here for you. Dave and Tor, I know you guys are working on a 2021 update to the report card, and we've been delayed somewhat on this program. We're hoping that the final 2021 update numbers might be available, and that you're somewhat constrained in terms of what you might be able to say about it. But I'm wondering if you could point to maybe at least one area of progress, or perhaps one area of increasing concern based on your examination for the 2021 update.
You're correct, Winetta, in the fact that we're trying to be tight-lipped about the report card until we release it. And it's because the release is kind of our one-time shot at getting media attention to it. But as we discussed in our presentation today, or I mentioned that the supplemental funding in the 2018 reauthorization of the FAA funding program, as well as the infusion of CARES Act funding, has definitely led to us having the ability to improve the condition in some respects of our airports. And so there has been a visible effect of that influx of money. I think every time we get an infusion of federal funds like that, especially where you don't have local match, where you're able to do that project that will open up a portion of your infrastructure, or make accessible new areas for development, or bring water to customers that did not have water before. Those are improvements that we can see, and it's probably not as firm of an answer as you were hoping for, but
that's great. Thank you, Tor. Dave, anything to add on that one?
Sure. At least having worked on the roads and highways portion, and to kind of echo what Tor said, the infusion of federal funds from the FAST Act has really, we've seen an improvement in the conditions of the roads, as evidenced by the asset management plan that the DOT has put together. So really, there are improvements to be seen from federal funds coming in, the expiration of those FAST Act funds tomorrow is somewhat concerning if they're not backfilled with something that's going to continue to improve our conditions of our roads and highways.
Great, thanks. Well, the conversation reminds me of 2 points that as a frequent user of the Minnesota to International Airport Road off-ramp to get to my favorite dog park, I see crews busily working on that, and I'm glad for it. But also never trust an Anchorage driver on the inside lane of a traffic circle. So, Kathy Giesel's online with us, and Kathy, go ahead, you've got a question.
Well, one other thank you, not so much a question as a thank you to our speakers, especially our new commissioner. Thanks for taking the job. I'm a huge fan of DOT, and I think all Alaskans are. They just don't realize it, how much the roads, bridges, airports all mean to all of us for commerce, getting our kids to education, opportunities, all of that. I appreciate that you brought up the university and our Alaska grown engineers. That's really where we need to be investing. That is a rich resource. So thank you very much for the information you presented. I enjoyed your presentations very much. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. And I will say that Alex Hills also has submitted a comment. Thanks for advocating on the behalf of the UAA and UAF engineering programs to Alex to Dave and Tor. Because they're also working together to understand how they can increase cooperation and gain more efficiencies with the various programs across the campuses. Well, with that, I don't see any other questions in chat or the Q&A. And Scott has something. Go ahead, Scott.
Yes, this is a question for the commissioner. First, I want to echo Kathy Giesel's comments. Appreciate you taking on this job. It's a big job. But one of the issues that we've dealt with, particularly when it comes to state contracting, is the inability to try to maximize Alaska hire. What are the things that you guys are going to do to try to ensure that more Alaskans than in the past get hired for these very large infrastructure projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do know that the governor's working on a task force to look at that. That's something that's on his mind. We have a lot of restrictions both with the federal funds and then with our own, state statutes and whatnot on how we're allowed to do procurements and go from there. I will say we have had some success back to that procurement model of CMGC, where we have a lot more working together with contractors during design and recognizing where a local community may have something to contribute to a project and work that in. So we have looked at some kind of out of box kind of solutions there, but when it comes to kind of our standard low bid contracting, we're still pretty restricted on those things. So, but there is an effort right now to really take a hard look at that.
And maybe I could leverage off that a little bit too. I know that there's been some questions about with this large influx of federal funding, what's our capacity for any match requirements, especially in this very challenging fiscal time and the potential for having very restricted capital budgets moving forward for the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, another great question. Yeah, that's something, we're waiting to see if this, it's so hard right now because, infrastructure bill hasn't been passed. But if it is, we will definitely be putting a request for the match to make sure we can accommodate, the funds that come in. Honestly, because we're almost to October, the first year, we'll be looking at, if it is approved, let's say this week, we'll be looking at accelerating projects for next summer, projects that we were going to do in 2023. We'd now be looking at 2022. And then out from there would be where we'd be looking at new investments. So, we're talking about those kind of strategies, but yeah, we're waiting to see what happens here.
All right.
I just want to add to that, we should remind our legislators that they supported House Joint Resolution 19, which supports investment in Alaska's infrastructure. If and when this infrastructure bill passes, when the conversation of matching funds comes up.
Great. All right. Well, Scott, it looks like that's it for the questions. So I'll turn it over to you for any final.
Great. Thanks, Vanetta. I want to extend our thanks and appreciation to Commissioner Anderson, Dave Gamez, Tor Anderzen. Gentlemen, you've illustrated the challenges and opportunities that lay at our doorstep. Let's hope we can overcome those challenges and fully realize all those opportunities. To our members and audience, join the Fiscal Policy Study Group this Friday at 8 a.m. as it continues to look at the cost of fiscal uncertainty. This week's featured speaker is David Howell, State Demographer. We have 2 upcoming programs of note. The Hickel and Egan Awards will be presented on Thursday, November 4th. We have pivoted to a hybrid format and hope you will be able to join us as we recognize 4 Alaska leaders. Watch for details this coming week. Also, mark your calendars for December 8th. That's when we have our annual legislator meet and greet. It's one of our favorite Northroom events, and we'll keep your fingers crossed so we can manage to do all this in person. Thanks to our members and friends for joining us again today. If you are not a member, I encourage you to become a member of Commonwealth North at www.commonwealthnorth.org. So thank you all for participating today. We stand adjourned.
Thanks.